Namo Jongde De Shen Jamo Do Jamo Yang Dobo Zobe Zang Zhebo Dong Xiao Se Denbo De Ho Xie Bo Je Den Jiang Jebo De Yue Ka Lo Je Wa La Na Men La Dong Men Nang Je Denbo Sang Je Jiang Den Bie Jia Wo Xia Zhe Tu Bo La Xiang Se Chu Do Jiao Su Jie 光子光年做就当子，草间的那公婆的不，我年纪的那就接送的这个我就了相子。难道跟我出多所让我一些叫做是真能不？找不就得送那方面我公婆就你就那相子，先就电报正面到一宿，先多找我就那相子。对着见着随波送往间，要面前见就那相子。广播突厥切电波，当前切边电波，色那夜电叫做些，电线线拉相层，旁边的唱着我就给送天主，几多的当求救我，现着就拉相层。这年正月朗阳的老婆到那绕东。先给当把眼点点，给的那样相思，别把这样们小心，给我们送走吧。让给三年要说的，六年上街的吧。干嘛着的嘛面当，就嘛是话说吧。面浪落到真大不，都是就能得到。三郎的月堂前日把烟，国防当年全就着的，高当那当去为老周，随便做了着哟。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Ultra Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of a lineage trained who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvatiputra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra. Like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight, and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on up to no old age and death, and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell on the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
公约所。莫略学长其心随便路，小觉作我的来作我的，多觉千波的些多觉成，求在的罗波多那罗波，研究中别波那的相。鸟类写了就了所望的，上报同面一年能着的，确定的月的当照片边，写上个上的年所年吧，了解是别解了所望的，了有月面兄弟乐着呢。大我这波是别不久前，上界观众宝宝要是说，上摩大别接了所的，协助当别出我的想，各当点别面包中的的，念就那些过去送了送。嘎当那么那那所望的，望见心的世界中阿妈，我到这边我说接着见，老马点边大波开着见，要是就把接了所望的，就算跟的老马都结成。长老刚的些年之中呢，就当天幕蒙着正在边，只见老马当老所的，长江送着跟了大爷面，街上淘宝这边就就，在月这边掏开这把烟，身在先天当了所的。借我更多养到那么多，这边却这白了落雪间，扫荡浪迹烟台绕昨年，多久将给过，娘到一说三界却当初界就那那，想求不多当年就走。老给切切切别做那些，高了平些上界诸波修上界就路界就能了，想求不多当年就走。老给切切切别做那些，高了平些上界诸波修上界。就能做些就能拿，想求不多当年就能，大概姐姐这边做那的，到了这些上街我们，哎呀，嗯，看我都跌了啊，那我都没得给他写个那内陆车过，内陆，啊，内陆车，内陆车上搞的是那么中意。다 지 바사 뇌진 제대다 지지 선생님의 가르치는 용어를 쓰는 거 가르치네 다나가 저기 저도 제생에게 라바텔레미게 뭐네 시기 돈은 내루데 가르치려래 쓰네 뭐네 저는 저기 되게 하우세레다 카투시나 로제데레
So to speak directly, what we are doing at this time by dealing with this subject matter, which is quite complex, we're actually searching for reality, that we're searching for the truth. So when we speak about the searching for the truth, and then what kind of truth that we're really searching here is we're searching for the truthness or the reality of the sentient beings and the environments where the sentient beings live. So how those both sentient beings and as well as the environment where the sentient being lives coming into being existence, how it does exist. This is a question that we are asking, and we're dealing with this subject matter at this point.
오늘 가서 되게 내로 가르치는 세고를 민주가 게임 도와는 로. 아니 오늘 전에 가서 감각에 다 이제 다 봐주셔도 세디 지고를 찾아와이나 대지지게 단다라 춘주 다서 시발하던 로바네야서 대티 단다 말레지 봐도 가서 만약에 대지게 된다 깔에 잡아래다 가만 나히지만 두르마도 야르 민주자 해잖아 너는 전제 예제로 왔어 저야나 저 가르치는 저 쇼거래 맞아 가르치 놓고 그랬어 만원아 저와져서 제레고로 와 되면도 알아나
So why it is crucial for us to really to look for, search for this truth, search for this reality. So just think about ourselves, right from our childhood up until now, starting from going to school, kindergarten, and middle school, high school, and all the way to the college. And the reason for that, going through all this process of studying and gaining knowledge, is to achieve happiness and overcome suffering. That's just the question, regardless of what we think. Whether we reject, this is not what I think, but this is the core question that we will ask. This is the desire that we have. So, however, we haven't been able to found, or we haven't been able to achieve happiness that we long to achieve, right? What happened? Why that has happened? What has gone wrong for that? Definitely there's something has gone wrong there, because we're unable to achieve the objective that we would like to achieve. Something has gone wrong in that, and in the process of our pursuing this happiness.
야, 다 예전에 다 가서게 다 가서게 딘드게 내룰래 단다게 빼나 제된 데이터라 생애 지다다 생리를 하지 배제 타투반도 저래다 안 생리 영원에 되게 제된 대신 샤와지래 연구를 생각은 단다발라 세가시만 되마도스 마도 예전에 다 가서게 소소게 마신나 계셨죠 그래 계셨어서 술을 저거잖아 다 저기 잠을린 데이터는 다 개개 첨부선나리 랑텐 첨부선나 또 첨부대 아니 로니도 가자는 비비긴 또 투가 온버대 근데 또 문제인데 다 개개 첨부지 켈낸 거 제거래
So now, none of our individuals on this planet Earth, be it as how expert they may be in terms of their modern knowledge, including science and so forth, regardless of how knowledgeable they may be, but none of them has actually been able to, able to demonstrate. And that is the objective that we are looking for. They are unable to present us, regardless of how expert they might be, how knowledgeable they might be. We haven't been able to, none of them have been able to, inherit us of this objective that we're actually looking for. Now, since something that is we are unable to achieve and we do not know what's gone wrong, and now it is time for us to question. It is time for us help from someone else, and there's no one else to ask at this point, but asking the teachings of the Buddha, teachings that is given by the Buddha more than 2,500 years ago.
다 된저기 덤바대 지 가서 시엔제디게 넘바잖아요. 지 당시에 저랑시잖아요. 가서랑게 된데 나가 되니라. 아니 다 수지 선제선에 니 라레 집에 남아서게 거든게 지랑게 된데 면상 되니라 무스페에 봐 지미 받체. 아니 뒤에 타고들랑 가서 다는 미시비 온게 거든게 선제되는 대신 샤워. 아니 대링 무스 아니 간디셔서래 되요 산에 딘데라. 또 미시비 메버스
So hence we are asking these questions to the Buddha for our objective. That is, nobody had been able to found this objective, and nobody has been able to inherit us of this objective. It is for this, at this point, we are asking to the Buddha, by visualizing Buddha in front of oneself, who is then surrounded by all those Buddhas, all the lineage gurus of the great deities on the stages of the path, the enlightenment, and all the Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and so on. So in their presence, you imagining that yourself being in their presence, and you yourself is again surrounded by all other sentient beings who are unable to find this objective, who are deprived of knowing this objective, who are deprived of pursuing achievement of this objective, and having a desire to ask these questions to the Buddha. And with this motivations and visualizations of Buddhas and the object of refuge, let's take a couple of minutes to meditate. So this is what we normally talk about, is that having a irreversible faith towards the object of refuge, and having an unconditional love and compassion for other sentient beings. Konda, ye xie sa wike ja tingi di ka xie xie di xa. Sorry, yeah, Jimmy soon share that separation. All of it separate. So as we, talked about earlier, that it is crucial for us to ask a question. So now it is a time for us questions. The question that we are asking today is that we are asking to the text that is the great deities on the stages of path to enlightenment, which is the subject matter that we are dealing with. That's all.
让人说说个这一方面吧的，那么说个，觉得这些小孩的确有呢，你这些小孩的他妈的把的，但他们说用的说说些吧，等着就那么的话，生个这些，你搞成一了，真别多呢，得把这金融投入进来，我那个是那车没把去啥个的吧？
So now to begin with the actual teachings, as usual, which begins from the major outlines, the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as a noble source. So when we are dealing with this first outlines, which is the major outlines, it is very beneficial and accumulate inconceivable merits if one is able to remember or one is able to visualize one's teachers beginning from the Buddha and all those lineage gurus of the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, all the way to one's own root guru, and remembering their kindness. And with this kind of visualizations, one is able to cultivate appropriate or irreversible faith, which will enables one to accumulate inconceivable amount of merits.
啥叫你吧？当晚了给吧这边是去吃话送一别个了，我说个去的就当面了白下个嘞，我说个年着的，刚才是白下个是呢，让真正的当前你去将来设备套的了，少个的家吃话就在这边个，这个去咋去么着去见，就那样子去看呢，看不见了，电影的六月的三个日去，那样就可以呢，然后我呢，上一轮对吧？着急了。
So then when we're dealing with next outlines, the second outlines, which is showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender, the respect for the teachings. That when we are dealing with this second outlines, then think about the Dharma as a medicine. And having taken this medicine, what kind of sickness that is being cured? What kind of the chronic diseases that has been cured by taking the medicine of Dharma is to grasping at self and self-cherishing mind and self-grasping. And this self-cherishing, self-grasping act as a chronic disease for us, which actually forces us to undergo sufferings without a break.
他瞧你到天边去了，你先接到小三跟着在理解啊，那当帮我讲他妈接到这个人吧，现在这一设计是记得送下了去。
Then how to listen? Then the third outline, which is how to listen to the teachings, in which both teachings and its author are great, which will then be followed by the fourth outlines, the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions.
对，接到设计是把了你，让去找现在对比成当，电脑我接到现在人把你现在打确实当对面打着用了，我是哪里都用，等你了的，那你今天点点准的着会打谁的去了？
Now, then we are really laying out our blueprint of engaging in the practice by following these two outlines, by saying that how to rely on the teachers, which is the root of one's path, and how the students then train their mind after having relied on the teacher.
他的一把人，你把人年纪，对一点了，你不能必须给我的，你不接单人必须年纪，那你不接单人必须了，你拿起拿下来，你把这些的，你不能做我去，他多么这次，他你不能做我了，送这个穷人的同学拿起人嘛，娘子连次。基本正大的往南这人把两三年，这就被前边浪这人把两三年，只有去当不年这，但就被前边浪这人把两三年这了，上午提前浪就被过，三节宽大点吧，三节接到这边去，三节呢学报了后，只有去当不年这，到三节呢学报了后去了，上午三节呢老把老老个被竞赛，他现在了话老老个三节门就把点吧。老把老百人把你写吧，这当不年这，到老把老百人把你写吧了，上午刚老你。 Tiba chimba chila la tida chiba do je tiba na tsuye ombala song shangsen la ba lo de jong xiang ne je se de tiba song song ne je da len bi tsuye je do song ne je ba ne bi tsu la ni rang la ma song je kan la lo bi je de la de la je da lo bi kan la lo bi je de la ba ne de se de la lo bi ren ba je ta de la bi ren ba la ni shiba chila la tida chiba da pa she ta ma ni la lo tsuye je ta do mo de 다 파신 타만이 로질라 주지 세네다 나도 피해셔봐 대니 지켜지 디지털 때봐 세나라도 로도야와 대니가 방급이 진세 고랭에 뭐 소소로 지지 다도 뭐 만지자 다 소소로 지라니 세네로 나도 지지 다도 뭐 지자 다 나도 로질라서 나도 소된봐 이제서 나도 소된봐 나도 로도야와 나도 감비지 감비 나도 지지 동bol라 니 손을 당연히 전대된 게 이제 서로 무슨 루주주 공부들이 취지다 정화 대권은 이제 다와텔라 더 봐지 다 동문이 이제 다 다와텔라 배번이 대권은은 주기를 받다 대권은 이제 tel라 배배 뭐지 다 동문이 이제 대권은 tel라 보니 뭐를 송 가정 리뷰 가정 뭐죠 대 다른 관계 루시에 봐 시바텔라 때는 다와질라 집에 봐지 다 동bol라 송那个各家我这个被禁止，我们这边人行路高吧，让路下巴士。他们说各家我们这边行路高吧，他东西都被到上去了，接巴拉，我说给各家我这那么多，啥子第一天的各家的我这巴拉，各家各啥高巴拉，各家的我这过来也是。别那啥子第一天的pom巴面巴写巴拉，你东不，你pom巴原来等你就要过来，原来等你就没过来生意的，你我这的马家吧，你点高被落地上去了接也嘛的，也是背过来送来的也是的。
So our ongoing discussions is on that identification.
东西对吧？拉动上去了，接巴拉他妈过去的上下呢？
That's all. So the importance of understanding the insight into the nature of reality or the nature of insight into the emptiness. In order to gain this knowledge of insight into emptiness, it is crucial to first of all to identify the object of negations, because without understanding of object of negations, identification of object of negations, it is simply not possible for one to understand what is meant by emptiness. For instance, when we talk about where there is no parts on the particular place, where there's no part, first, if there is a part, and in what manner this part would be, how is this part will be existed in this particular place? By knowing that, you'll be able to understand the absence of the part in this particular place. Similarly, when we talk about emptiness, we need to first of all to identify the object of negations, without which ascertainment of emptiness is not possible.
那我说都写的，对，我说可是搞的差有点是能的嘞，就那就那我说也，主他们可是也那样让路给，让他给我也那些让路了，多少的我们谈就让路过来也是了的，我们谈就打断。我们谈就打的，我也那些给通的，电话车上的我们谈就的，我们的居民是讲的做的，因此我们谈就给打了，我说给各下年不得，当然我说给，那是真的就各下的呢。 如说就去看这就越那样，落一下咱就嘛都可能讲的主播生意上，星期主播生意的，这一次我们咱就要嘛的现在，那我们谈就给他都给打的。
So regardless of how much philosophical tenets there might be, but when it comes to actual presentation of the reality or the ultimate reality of emptiness, there's no other philosophical tenets that can present other than Madhyamaka Prasankika. So therefore, again here, one must not one should not be misunderstood by thinking that that's understanding of other philosophical tenets are useless. This is, however, not so, because by going through the process of learning of those lower philosophical tenets will actually, actually prepare us for understanding the ultimate, philosophical tenets of Madhyamaka Prasangika. So when it comes to the Madhyamaka Prasangika, regardless of how, what kind of that phenomenon it may be, whether it be it as a formless, or whatever that may be, so long as those are existence, there's nothing other than impeded by the thoughts and concepts and term.
저랑이 유tin의 주바 라시 주바 지어야 말이라나 아니 저랑 배트 쳐다치나 타니에 대한 매번 차도도 저랑 쳐달라는 로도 세대 까바리 가슴아 좀 리엔처.
So we have negated the opponents by saying that when the opponent have raised a question by saying that when you say that there's no such things, even to the atoms, have existence of on their own, or existence of intrinsic reality, or the intrinsicness. If you reject across the board of entire spectrum of phenomena, then you're actually falling into the nihilism, which is quite, objection raised by the other opponent. But we, by giving the explanations and elucidating and refuting that objections that has been discussed in our previous discussions.
대체 아니 라시지 매나 아니 자원이네 매버 차고 말이에스. 라시지 매바다 매바니 쳇바데 셰마도나 아니 저한테 레그래 엄마 탄저에게 라시지 매바다 매바니데 니 여와시그래 라시지 매나 매고 말 탄예도 여래 탄예도 세메 조그래 탄예도 샤제 나제 태그래.
So therefore we have talked about earlier that during our previous discussions, previous session, that if one is unable to draw a distinctions between non-existence and non-inherent existence, then one will likely to fall into the same view of nihilism. So therefore, one should understand the difference between non-inherent existence and non-existence. So Madhyamaka Prasangika presents that when it is not the same understanding or the same ideas of when we're talking about non-inherent existence and non-existence. There's a big difference. There's a big gap between these two, non-inherent existence and non-existence. So this needs to be understood.
첨부만 된 사모게 마시나요? 둘이지라고 그래서데 러시아 제거래다 오민타와세로.
So although we may not have a profound understanding of the Madhyamaka's viewpoint, Madhyamaka's standpoint, we should at least have some kind of idea of what is meant by non-inherent existence and what is meant by non-existence in accordance with the standpoint of Madhyamaka Prasangika.
대체 다만진 로긴다. 다니바 가장 문제 초중화가 봐네. 같이 나래서도 가자네 장전이나 대양 치바송다 된바데 뭐저단 제지 마제바당 네고션도 민조와당 난조션라 메르고 대양 우미자와래서.
So now let's go through the reading of the text on the chapter 16, not negating enough. Okay. So refuting an overly restricted identification of the object to be negated. Refuting the overly restricted identification of the object to be negated. So here it begins with by opponent's opinion by saying that object to be negated is an intrinsic nature that has three attributes. causes and conditions do not bring it into into being. Second, it's the condition is immutable, and third, it is posited without depending on some other phenomena. For Nagarjuna's fundamental deity says.
디 계속 가르치고 그러잖아. 아니 엄마 자와시로는 치주송다 데바지 자샤 대처럼 오미게 가샬라 자와이나 지금 말이에 가자 충치도 니 단다데 따발라서 더 되는 가에르마도 무보티는 가에 말이에 다 같이 돼 버리냐.
So this is the opponent's standpoint. So we're all aware of that. Because they are citing from Nagarjuna's the fundamental deities and the verse that we will be reading later, and saying that if you were to reject or to negate the intrinsic nature, then you will run into these problems.
엄마 자와래 장시 제단 젠레네 종아지바 마이노 마치 제단 젠레 종아네 종나네 장시 셰바 젠도 조로 장시 셰바 젠 시샤 제다보나 종완 조로 장시 단네 주미당 신라 되버 매바인 시송베 셔로 송도 아니 시송베 셔로 송도 모자사스 로에
Also, 등에디 직제 니에티 그냥 본조야 잘로 쉬셔.
어떠지
So now the Nagarjuna's the fundamental deity says it is opponent's standpoint, citing Nagarjuna's deities by saying it is not reasonable that nature should arise from causes and conditions. If it did arise from causes and conditions, then the nature would be something that is made. And how could it be suitable for a nature to be something that is made? And nature is not fabricated and does not depend on others.
되게 고물루르게 단다게 오미자게 소매데 가서 송거서나 배나 맞춰이나 메디게 장신된데레스 배나 메이 장신데 차와레스 저러 메이 장신데 차와 임바데 니 현라 되면 동반이 임바데 니 단다 치주송다 데바데레스 무슨 저 간제진소나 라니 장신 영어데 니 현다질레 되는 것들은 소샤지 말해야지 치주송다 데바지 고거레세데 가자까비 가자민바체 배는 매 사보 임바데 니 현라 되면데 그런 사보레마도 현다지게 현다지 큰용에 그 사보 소샤서 게지 말해야지 진짜대로 된다 맞아 때문에 이라시로 와서 지해져 되게자.
So here in this the citations from the fundamental deities is that when we talk about the nature of the fire being, fire being hot, and nature of the fire is actually hot, right? It has a hot temperature, fire. And that fire being hot temperature is not actually dependent on other factors. It is not some kind of dependent upon other factors. Its nature of fire being hot, it's being hot by nature itself. The fire is the nature of fire itself. And it is not something that is dependent on other factors to become the fire being hot.
되지. 데레마도스 되게 그 가셔 찾는 좀 가르선데여서 왔다도 진유걸로서 그 신나게 뭐보나 장신 된다와시도 주번되나 오마베 가셔 샤고 메지 데 가셔 문진바네 강하게 까나 최대 장신 매번니도 또비 오메타와질레 집에 가시 자와 데 문진바 이노 대타나 뒤셰나 지진지 제바 당 현도 조안에 랑게 데바 나지 주심베 대다 랑심메바 주메고반 조아 당 대다게 장 몽보나 랑심메바 또반 조아 소지 전 예베 ye timo mayin bi gaja kala yin ji rang ge ngo ju bi rang jin de ju na ne je chen la me de pa dan xian de min je wa su su ju go so xie pang ba ne o mi yun na yun de ma ne de ma xi ne yue chang de da ge chao ji ji mo ne jun ju ba yin ji ga ji ngo gaja rang ge ngo ye go ne mo zin ba me no so me no so
Now, replying to the opponent's objections or the questions, here it says reply in general. It says, if someone claims that internal and external things, seedlings have intrinsic nature in this sense, then Madhyamaka indeed must refute such. However, here, identifying the object to be negated means identifying the fundamental object of negations. When you refute the fundamental object of negations, then the Madhyamaka view, the knowledge that phenomena lacks intrinsic nature develops in your mind stem. Fallacies arises if we follow this opponent's interpretations, since the partisans of the non-Madhyamaka Buddhist schools have already established that compounded phenomena are produced by causes and conditions are mutable. We should not have to demonstrate to them the absence of intrinsic nature. They also should have recognized that things lack intrinsic natures. How can this be the unique Madhyamaka's object of negations?
되게 계속 가르치고서는 오미가자이나 오미가자데 까도디 아니 오미타와데 니에고로 아세데 지제로.
So what we have, to summarize in the paragraph that we have read earlier is, if it is the object of negation, so then as soon as you negate that object that is to be negated, you come to realization of what is to be established in the place of that has been negated.
된저이나 아니 추추송다 덴바데 오미가자이나 아니 좋다 오마데스게 아니 뭐보다도 추추송다 덴바데 도고려와 아니 대다게 아니 뭐보랑심에도 또 번져와다 오미타와니 번져로고려 아세네 제다.
So now one is raising questions or objection to the other the opponents by saying that if you were to consider that the three attributes that they talked about earlier are the object of negation, then these three objects of negations are negated and understood by the lower philosophical tenets as well. If this is the case, then the lower philosophical tenets will come into realization of ultimate nature of reality. However, it's not so.
된저송다 추추송다 덴바데 오미가자 갈라이 예사치다와.
So it is therefore those three attributes that talked about earlier is not the object of negation, ultimate object of negation in accordance with Madhyamaka Prasangika.
되지. 다 오미가자 세데 다 랑신시 두바. 랑신 말에 뭐 주나 아니 저다 jel라 되바 개거 세데 관에 손사로 와세지.
So Lam Rim Chenmo
pena rangi pena monda ngö chuba ni chebase de gona do rangi ngö chuba rangi de chuba ne oma mobo chi gi jon to man son sare se de nda de ya na ngö chuba yin rangi ngö chuba yin na ni jeta cheba te ba de sawani de ba ne es.
So then yes, we already talked about that. It's something that exists by its own side, or that it actually exists by its own nature, then depending upon causes and conditions will become impossible.
Ti gona mo je chen je ma je wa ne ko chen de chen de men jo wa 아니 조제잖아 라만에서에 장기 뭐 주바랑로 고지에 말이에요. 라인바. 나다 코로게 변에 라신이 있지. 라신이 받아 장기 뭐 주바니데 야와셔고도.
Yeah, it's nature, and depending the phenomena, its nature, and the the phenomena, the ultimate nature of reality of that particular phenomena must be distinguished.
아야. 때때때로 고대와도 다니게 코로메 오도 요도 용다. 메드 차이 장신이 받대 아니 지체절라 되어 말에 내가 좋아하고 말에 조세절라 라려고 말에. 메드 사부인 말.
The fire being the heat of the fire doesn't really depending upon other factors, and nor that heat of the fire cannot become a non, heat of phenomena. So it will always remain as a fire. As long as this is fire, it will always remain its nature being heat and hot.
자, 매크로 제체절라 되어 그래. 아니 내가 이제 저 그래. 아니 그 가사 조세절라 라려고 매크로 사실 사이 장신이 받대 아니 되고 말해서 되니 야와셔히 그도마도 관련도 못다.
But then again, the fire itself, that doesn't mean that fire itself doesn't depend upon other factors, other causes and conditions. Fire being hot or having a heat, or the the temperature is not something that is dependent upon others. But fire itself is again dependent upon other factors. So this should be distinguished.
대체 로이다 예양지 대담바다 대담바 당 양다바 주바다 덴바 주나 지진지 마제바 소스 조거나 안지 대다게 대담바 주바 소제 되미데 베나 bomba 메다바 bomba 본레 bomba라 메다베 처장 메다바 bom비 되는데 미롱게 또 대화 대유 되는데 자고바 셴노 대전도 대담바 주바 소이나 참미비 오보 주거나 참미비 오보 자이가자 민데데 얘네 좋다마와 나지 추모마이비 짐베 타바자이비 짐바데 리제 코아치비 자와 미비 샤다 대다 대다 랑지메 바텔라 보나 네퍼네 강자 토마메비 마리비 짐바 这样子吧了，这样美女别大个的，我送的多吧，他图呢，没得他图讲，现在这牛毛那多吧，民就有效了，我送。
So many mathematical texts adduce arguments such as if things exist essentially, then they could not depend on causes and conditions. They would have to be immutable and so forth. However, this statement indicates fallacies that would be entailed if things exist essentially. They do not identify the object of negation on its own terms. It is the case that if something exists ultimately, exists in reality, or truly existed, then it could not depend on causes and conditions, and so forth. However, that is not with ultimate existence. Existence means, for example, ultimate existence means, for example, even though being a pot entails being impermanent. Impermanence is not the proper meaning of pot. Rather, you have to say that it means a bulbous supply-based thing able to perform the functions of holding water. Likewise, if something exists ultimately, etc., it would have to be heartless things. Still, here is Madhyamaka. We do not we do not suggest that partless things is a fundamental object of negations, since partless things are merely imputed from the unique perspective of the advocates of the philosophical tenets. Such notions are not the fundamental cause that binds or embodied being in cyclic existence. Further, if even you determined that those partless things lack intrinsic nature, and then meditate on that, this would not at all counter the ignorance conception, which has operated from the beginningless time. Therefore, even optimal and direct knowledge of that would not overcome the innate afflictions.
되게 렌세데 가서서는 데레 지당 덴바 트는 지체제 마제바지다 거로와세 이나 지체제 마제바데 덴바 트비 되마레스
If something that exists truly, that's ultimately existence, then it should not be dependent upon its own causes and condition. But not depending on its own causes and condition is not the meaning of ultimate reality.
페나 bomba mataba bomba ina mataba yin goroade mataba de bombe teamaroas to dewade bombe teamaroas.
Although that the part is impermanent, isn't it? But the permanence is not the meaning of the part. When it comes to the meaning of the part is a bulbous supply-based things able to perform the functions of holding water. That is the meaning of the meaning.
대신에 대한통바 마주나 대한통바 주나 참에 차체 마행에 주고로와스. 근데 차체 마행에 주 차체 마행에 참에 대 참에 까바데 아니 돈이 또 참에 까는 돈이 또그 말이에요. 오이 된다 또.
Then the main point here is now, even that one come to understand the partless things lack of part, or it's a partless particles. That doesn't mean that you gain the realization of emptiness.
대 진짜 가르잖아 참에 까네 대 강배 아니 가자 라지메 바토고 말이라 아니 타투 아니 뭐데 저는 뉴질랜드 그 말이 아니 시줄랜드 그 말이에요.
By rejecting the partless, one will not come into realization of lack of intrinsic nature, nor will counteract our misconceptions of phenomena, of God itself, or cosmic phenomena.
이게 된다고 오늘 요새 마스 보시고 근데 아니 내 만조 살았어 그래서 그 차고 인자의 쉬고 거서 가서 거기 녀을 사 대나서 대나 따에 대나 따에 대나버비 뒤서 내제제 말이 버쳤다 zon이 대메바 대나메바 조존네 대야라도 긴 진비 유나 신진바 마셰바 내제제 말이 빈진 땅 신진바 도네 간사게 다고바나 따지 라운체제 다고바다 치제 다고바나 조아 디 참에다 젬바케지 참에다 라제 체바 손데라 소바 주타마 콘네 따바나 고바네 나바탄체 미롱 데제 대다 미나 따와 때는 법이 뒤에서 대상시 때는 뭐 때는 마법바 때는 마법에 강비체야 대상시 강고대 따와 때는 법바네 강비된데 이미 싫어 대시를 강네 강네 모두 줘봐도 공부때 타투바 대상시 또 세라 대다 낀다진 짐베 따바 상제 다니 메바 통에 현지지 뉴모나 도반데바 하자타와 하자타데 주발레 손
Thus, when making philosophical determinations, make your principle take to take to determine that the object as conceived by innate ignorance does not exist. Ancillary to that, refute object of acquired misconceptions. If you do not understand this and fail to eradicate the perspective of innate ignorance, and when you refute the personal self, you will only refute a self that is that is permanent, unitary, and independent. When you refute in an objective self, you will only refute things that are imputed by the advocate of philosophical tenets, such as objects that are partless particles, partless movement of experience, or nature, or the natural substance, or the pradhana. With the ganas or stands asserted by the Samkhyas, this is completely inappropriate. If you think otherwise, then when you make philosophical determinations, you will establish nothing more than this shallow selflessness. As philosophical determinations are made for the purpose of meditations, when you meditate, you will have to meditate only on this. Therefore, even if you actualize as a selflessness in meditation and accumulated your cultivation of it, nothing would come to it. It would be extremely absurd to claim that you can overcome innate afflictions by saying and non-existence that two selves imputed by acquired misconceptions. Chandrika's commentary on the middle way says. Take a 10 minutes break here.
Nima, you are muted.
So now we need to understand there are innate affections, or the innate misconception, or the intellectually acquired misconceptions. So the innate misconceptions or the affections are present in all sentient beings, including insects and so forth, not only the human beings, but also all other animals as well. But then it's intellectually acquired misconceptions or the affections are based on following the wrong tenets, such as sound being permanent and self being intrinsic existence and so forth. So here, we must understand, just by negating negating the object of negation, which is established by the law of philosophical tenets, will not actually counteract our misconceptions regarding ultimate nature of realities. When we negate the object of negation, we must negate the object of negation by identifying the object of negation in accordance with Madhyamaka Prasangikas, and then follow the meditation on it.
Then I passion you the tabi color scenario, Omaranji by get Jun Shat in the Chebi color, and then you told the Ransanje to Sagani, Tony Togomare, Tony Togomaresana, and then Yumo Pambala, Tony Togomaresana. Ne Tajitre. Oma Taji Lula, Yumo Chinchilla, Rajimeba Tobatella, any Tipa Kongi, Chepa Meba, Yumo Pang Chinchilla, and the Rajimeba Togo said, and Tai Karsavata. So,
for instance, when we are going through the studies of the perfection, then these studies will be done in accordance with the Madhyamaka Swatantikas, where it suggests that it is not necessary for one to gain intuitive realization of the direct realization of emptiness in order to eliminate afflictions or the delusions, such as by the beings of Pratyeka Buddhas and the Shervakas have actually, the arhats have been actually eliminated their afflictions. However, they have not gained intuitive realization of emptiness. But when it comes to the Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoint, there's no way that one can eliminate one's afflictions or the delusions without coming into realization, direct realization of emptiness. So, therefore, there are the lower philosophical tenets who accept indivisible minute particles or the indivisible subatomic particles, and which is partless particles accepted by the lower philosophical tenets. And similarly, that the partless instant of cognitions, or in other words, indivisible moment of consciousness, is said to be the ultimate nature of reality, which is accepted by the lower philosophical tenets.
다른 저기 대응업이네 가 닐루체 콘다게 로고 말에 마도 제가 체리 받아서게 반응하는 잠을리들 파친 지로게 거라 아니 된테 신의 차이 된테 배전 종디 자지마도 종칸 자지마도 종하랑라 데메 통이 받아 로고를 러고야도 잠을리들 파치 토로게 거라 소체가 받았어.
So it is said even by the modern scientists that when the universe, when it comes to, when it goes through the process of its dissolutions, and it will just go through the dissolving of the gross level of the particles into the subtle level of particles, and then it will disappear.
다 된저기 나중에 계시시베 걸라 된저기 때는 잠불린데 베데 지네 세거라 지데 베데 나하 동바 나기 차네 dentrin peche cha shima tuki kola lepe kola, yunjo tsu dentrin de tsu kare chene chachen chagre se, rapa chagre se, kare chene chagre se be kola, matsu ke le yi tang, dentrin ki kya liange tasa kola, le chungwa ki tsu diyo ngore se, di patola tseri pa dhuwe do. Tseri pa ki te tsu diyo pa te le yungwa ki se kumar, ta kare chene diyo kare se, chua yin jirwa.
So then when this the worlds comes into the complete dissolutions, and then what will left behind is nothing else than the space itself. But then, of course, there are the particles, the atomic energy particles, something that really looks like a partless, something that is indivisible, minute partless, or the particles. And how does then, within this particular space, those particles, the subatomic particles of energy, again, coming into being and growing its size and becoming a grossel, and again it forms the universe and so forth. When it comes to such questions, the Buddhism always talked about the karma of sentient beings. It becomes, because of the karma of sentient beings, then the particles again, increases its size by collecting the particles and by intersecting the particles and joining the particles each other, and then it becomes grossal level, and finally it forms a universe where the sentient beings can exist. And so the scientists obviously not going to have this kind of answer by saying this is a karma, but they might have a different way of explaining how those particles again become a grossal level of particles and finally forms the universe.
Kanje tendu ki suche rapa si chawa la nga zo pe na zambili ki meye na zambili ki senche ye na zambili ki chitingi le la tene yunjo zambili sata si chaya di chitingi le la tene chagre se lawa ye na senri pa son ki kanje pa tatu ne su yunjo su chu si te la kanje shige ne me she ta nga zo le do chi ke ma le na tata na de tu ye ne me me she ta kanje to si cheba chi me du ta tani che tanda di ki dendri chame se di dero wa nga zo pe na raji pa to se ki tende ye 동부 지진이 때문에 타마들 차실을 때문에 된데 생인데 된데 이 숨은 이반도 지레거라 다 엄마 탄저를 루스인데 레이비컬라 아니 시 차진디 자원이는 메시어데 아니 조시지 로상제마도 사실 이定的 这个 대장해야 말해서 레이비컬라 아니 된데 차진 랑이 댄서데 차쇼데 레로라.
So now we're here talking about how the dependent originations functions and coming into existence. That is what, we're trying to discuss on that. So now, when it comes to the Madhyamaka Prasangika, also the Madhyamaka Swatantikas, when it comes to the dependent originations, they talked about the dependent originations of cause and effect, and dependent origination depending upon other factors. There are two divisions, or the two levels of dependent originations described by the Madhyamaka Swatantikas. But when it comes to Madhyamaka Prasangika, there's no other subtle than the mere designated, mere imputed by concept and term is the ultimate existence, ultimate meaning of dependent originations by the Madhyamaka Prasangika.
당하지 시바 뒤지 참여해서 계속 생기나 대바도 로어다 시비지 되는 시나 난심바 시바 뒤지 참여하기 받아 제도고 되는 배는 가서 생고지 이런 계지면 주제 된지를 계지바 차셔야 거라 세력이 뜻이 장가 접이 거라 되는 가서 이때 단단 가서 유는 유튜브에서 말아 배시 시 뜻은 로고도 근데 된지 이게 시에다 시비기 진지 이토는 시바데 조 계시 시비거라 아니 시바게 타이도 시바데 엔 뒤지 참여를 세 계시 된지 이거라 아니 좋다 마서 좋다네 대바도 좋고.
So now the other philosophical tenets or the lower philosophical tenets, they're able to go all the way, trace all the way to the partless the instant of cognitions, or the part, and then the indivisible, the movement of consciousness, or indivisible movement of 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 apprehension, or then indivisible minute particles, or the indivisible subatomic energy. So they're able to trace all the way to that subtle level of energy, both subject and object. So however, when it comes to the Madhyamaka Prasangika, those are not actually subtle level of dependent originations.
Tendriki kesa nga tsu shinju chebi kanya pene shepa singi shinda chamore de ombi yiti jo ma tungi ombi yiti chechiwe ya shepa sida shida chamoro. Ta nga tsu le jinde de jiwa nga shi yume yi kesa shesa de kanje shebi ye kechi tonda shede shepa kechi ki chamin cha suwa ina ane shebi jing hama ten jo ma tungi ka le suna shepa de jing che gubi suna cha dongsa. Tendri yana ane shepa ngama meba chi de shima le jing kanta tenne tigre se de toba chimbo le gire tenne.
So however, even those acceptance of indivisible movement of consciousness has falls into there's a lot of errors, in other words, if you think very carefully. Why? Because if you accept the indivisible movement of consciousness, how can this consciousness can become a cause of its future consciousness? And then, in other words, this indivisible movement of consciousness becomes the final existence of that particular consciousness, which will not have a continuity of its future consciousness.
Dechi, ta tendri kesi shebi kala pena nga tsoge dende doa pena nehang de relebi kala mongcha de besin chamo resi kesi shebi doa. Besin chamo de segi nashi jiden jin besin chamo yin na ta kesi de yin gogor ma to kasi nga tso de no bebe chi tsenri la kepa chi ye kusho chi ye labi kala nga tso padewa ami ngen shu sengi de tsenri bagi tanda kele me to bi jise kare sana ani pami kucha no la simbi chamo zon drone ni pigi nge de la ni bobi chago ra sana tendri kesi she tu shegi doa so kadre le tu ya na dai.
So now, similarly, we talked about those, as we are all familiar with. We have all kinds of viruses. We have gone through those experiences of pandemic and epidemic and so forth, and we believe that there's a certain virus which we're not very sure how the scientists would identify this as a sentient, or it is something other than that. And so it's a very subtle virus, a subtle, in other words, a subtle worm that cannot be seen by our naked eyes. It requires a very advanced, advanced equipment, so the advanced attributes to be able to see those viruses. So similarly, about at the one time, one of the monk who has actually gone through the studies of this modern science, he has said that when it comes to the rebirth, in the Buddhist point of view, we talked about the intermediate consciousness is able to enter into the red and white drops of the father and mother's womb, and then mother's womb, and then will give it rebirth. But at this point, the scientists was not able to explain that, because they are not very sure, or they're not knowing at this point how this consciousness, so-called consciousness, is able to enter into the mother's womb by entering into the father and mother's drop.
Dechi, ane padda di pami kinga nga so nambi shona shede pami ngensa chabada ane pama nyinga kudal chiyo meba dilo pa na ane 다 시 바도와 지가 저 실로네 주요를 계시 시에데 남비존이 시그레다 거기서는 된지 체리 바게 계시 시그 말에 아니 토만에 그런 콘트라년도라 아니 소된 좀 bet든지 참모여래 bet든지 참모랑야 이 차용해서 된지 계시 시나 되는 가서 저항하실 때 간에 제거를 하나 이 파밍에게 소된 다다 맞속에 내부 뭐뭐여데 뜻을 간가 안지 나시 타데베게 내부 뭐뭐지 봄버들에 여러 말에서는 당 나중에 공부하는데 집에잖아 리도 다 뜻을 신주제 내 수천벌에도
So, in the Buddhist point of view, when the consciousness of the bardo, the consciousness finds it's a karmically connected with the parents who are engaging in the intercourse, and at the moment of this intercourse, and such consciousness was able to, due to this karmic connection with his parents, able to enter into the drops of father and mother, then finally be able to enter into the mother's womb. However, according to the scientists, I was told by one of the monk who has, as I mentioned earlier, that one who studied the science, when he was saying that the scientists actually said that there is a sudden, eminent in not sudden kind of sentient. It is already some kind of in the form of like in the form of subtle, subtle sentient that is actually presented in the mother and father's drop itself. So it doesn't require some other consciousness to enter into it, because it has its own potential of becoming ascension or the beings, just by having this the drop of fathers, faultless, all the faultless drop of fathers and mother. So therefore, this is not something that we cannot take it lightly, but we need to examine carefully. That's all.
다 두서 배 도바 첨부세 그래 다 간제 뒤서 체리게 야제 요나 다 시바도 지단 시바 생에다 체리 야제 가서 요나네 가보러 얘나야 나서기 때 소잡도 생두 생에게 소된이 büt지슬라 나시 예리 여 말이 시기냐다니 지르다라 소방아서 대다 수이 종아기 내가 전에 지신이 돼 바로기 체바가리 여 말에 생에 되게 넘버도 슈첨부 시고 이제서 체리바게 된적이 너무 싫어서는 아니 제바도 아니 제바데 가리가니 제바 차고도 세네 셰비콜라 아니 제 만다와지야나 아니 대세요 여셔토지르마도 단 중앙이게 내가 제당 라기 돈에 봉보대다 시 신도니기 단 가족이 봉보가 다래 사주면은 이게 내가 맞아 진짜로 그때니까는 봉보대 강적으로 대나기 신도 강보다 집에 제장인데 민생에게 된적이 시주지 맞아와야나 아니 시비기 진생도 좋다고 말어.
So it requires a lot of analysis, the difference between how the trees and other, things, the grasses, trees, the flowers, and how it actually coming into non-existence. But it was actually at some point it is nurtured and it's germinated and it's blossoming. But then at other points, eventually they all coming into the dissolutions, right? It disintegrates, and so we need to think about the difference between the human beings when the human beings are going through the process of dying, and when the human being dies. Is it something similar to how the trees and the grasses and flowers die, or is it something different? If it is something different, what is different between the two? How can we distinguish differences between how the trees and such things dies, or how the human beings are dying? What is the difference between these two?
네, 다 시비 진생에 제 매화이나 세대 대지 상제라 배전체 마도 텔레비전 상나 도무가 타치로 다 시비 진매나.
So if one do not accept the continuity of our consciousness, then then it is certainly then that working for the welfare of other sentient beings and working for one's own future life become pointless. It is rather focus on working for this life alone.
대체 다시 비진 여바다 매바니데 매바 켈레네 레가 제바다 여바 켈레네 레가 제바니데 소소 여바 켈레네 레가 제나电话 요래서도.
So if we follow to follow by accepting the continuity of consciousness and not accepting continuity of accepting consciousness, and which one is more beneficial for oneself, or one should analyze. But I would think that by accepting continuity of consciousness, and then if we can work in according with this acceptance, and will be more beneficial.
대체 다 된저지 있잖아. 저 당저고 진 되게 돼 내가 첨부래나 저 대소 제당에나 저항하시 여드면서 계시 생인들이나 야 대소 냐냐이 돈들에 지 저항하시 정해들의 로지다 뭐보시는 시비거라 뭐보지 이후들에 다 지진 다 남비존의 시비기 때 된지 제대로 나시 말했을라나 다 컴퓨터는 마서는 대 가리기 다 제세 그래 가리지기 니 제제는 요거 그래서 대술의 신주 선거도 전에 시행받을 지제로잖아. 대어 내가 전부 지어지로.
So now, although that we have a lot of evidence of the rebirth of the little child be able to remember their past life, and there are the numbers of those, but one should not really confine one's understanding of rebirth and next life only on that reason, by setting an example of how the young children can remember their past life and so on and so forth. Rather, one should also come to an conclusion of by going through one's own exploration or one's own examination of how this is possible, by understanding precisely of how the consciousness continued from one moment to another. This is very important.
뭐지? 주발에 다음에 또 세타비 다반신 내는 안지 된다면 봐 대시 다음에 시베 다다와 시전 인신 마와신의 차시 송신 레발레장 평생 저와메비 된데니 베이고네 세와샤위 시시바스 ранчин цибу джине тонжен то дена ланчиме то сете джучин жеба пон шепа не чема жинчи не пон жини то ше сонте ше сонте де канза ке даме ла сонжан чу제 даме ла сон데 че dāmi tōtse tāpi dāpa shīn dēne mē mārī tēndā mēndē bā tēshī dāmi shēbē mārī bā shī chān shīn shīn mā shīn dā tsā shē yārō sō nō nā sō tē bā dā chē bā shā.
So Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle word says, when knowing selflessness, some eliminate a permanent self, but we do not consider this the basis of the conception of I. It is therefore astonishing to claim that knowing this selflessness, and expunges and uproots the view of self. Also, Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle ways commentary says, to elucidate this very point, the irrelevance of such twined affections by way of an example. Someone sees a snake living in the wall of this house. To ease this concern, someone else says, there's no elephant there. Alas, to others, it is ridiculous to suppose that this would dispel the fear of snake. Chandrakirti refers to the selflessness of the person, but it is same for the selflessness of object. He could have added, when knowing selflessness, some eliminate acquired conception of self, but we do not consider this the basis of ignorance. It is therefore astonishing to claim that knowing the selflessness expunges and uproot ignorance. Question.
되게 된다도 가르쳐 버서는 내가 가서 까거에 ranshime ba ka goreese lawache 아니 ka bikola ranshime ranshi tuba de makawache 아니 주티용하게 줬다버티 스카도 아니나 아니 다음에 또 ranshime ba 또 두고 말에 취지 다음에 또 두고 말 가서 다음에 또 두고 말에서 된다 되죠.
So although one may say that I am negating the inherent existence of phenomena, self and phenomena, but then in the place of negating this existence of self, negating this, if your understanding of selfness is mere selfness that is expounded or that is accepted by the Lord philosophical tenets, then you will not come to an understanding of ultimate nature of reality.
pena maso shina tenu tu yere sen ro bache tu yere sen ro ba kanshin ro bi kala ani pigela launchen mendu sen ha ko ne ani jugin jiba de pontu ko mare was tere.
So as that example that we have said earlier, when someone says snake living in the wall of this house, to ease this concern, in someone else's, there's no elephant here. So this will not help, right? To suppose that this would dispel the fear of the snakes.
Tena gi te tanji kan ne kansa ge karsa kintan zensi ge rapa te se mepo chane ne nenje mepo te zo tu ko mare se better sho kono ya mas.
So just by, and earlier we talked about, just by counteracting the acquired conception of self will not actually be able to, eliminate the innate conception of self.
되지. 아예 때데 가서 카실로 좀 만다왔잖아. 때 희에데 데링 희에데에서 마송을 여받은 거로 저라게 데데레스 희고르마도 상제 상주 상만의 연연된데 대단요. 돈유도 별로다 상주 센세 데데 현달레버 시고 근데 가서 먼저 개발가라 수소라기 찬호데래. 수소라기 찬호 가여바데 저기 찬호데 아니 저랑 영어지 제거해야 되지. 저랑
So now, at this point, our ongoing discussions, we're talking about identification of negations, object of negations. And for that, it is just not by following the scripture, but now by reading the scriptures, and then one need to think about by directing one's understanding inward, and to find what is meant by the identification of correct negation, object of negations. How do we find this? How do we identify the correct object of negations and so forth? So this requires rigorous contemplations and single-pointedness of understanding how this identification of object of negations.
되지. 근데 나서 단단하게 나서 지시비거라 소소 집에다 준바세 그러 또딱 상징인 바치 천한 진여 말 바진 바다신 템보지 이바 제고 사본로지 여바 시샤체네 데도.
So then at this point, we never think of ourselves being imputed by conceptions and terms. Never. We do not have this, but rather we have a very solid understanding of how we are. And while we fixated on solid existence of who we are.
또 현다바 유셔도 가서기 땡땡이 토는 고화진에 토로잖아. 따와 토는 유셔도 쇼바 토는 쇼지 평가 전부래도 소소생인데 계획바 뭐 강가 야자는 데도 소리지만도 다른 가서 뭐에 지금 소소 신주 제거이나 도고 단순이나를 로에 동에 사회 동에 무슨 저거도 메신다지 이방만냐도 소리래도.
So if one is able to follow one's life in accordance with understanding of dependent originations, it not only is beneficial for your understanding of this the ultimate view of ultimate nature of reality, ultimate reality. But also it will actually become a great contributory factor, in other words, beneficial for one's own day-to-day conduct, or one's day-to-day activities, which will, in other words, which will become impeccably sound discipline or morality.
Te ngazo pena tak senchen se so den ji jing so le den de yin bi chan de guo jin lian de de ji. De yin da de fa yu shu da pena ku yu sing ji ro da kong jong wa ji. Nga so le shu ji yu ro che ge do. De san ne de le jong wa kong ji ma ne so na nga zu ta do do. Din de ge shi ji de pa ne ju de ji ji sen je da ma de ju da da ji ji sen je yin ga de. Ne so so pe de ne ngone chen de ji gong ma ji la ba nya de so ji le do.
So here now, if you really live our life with the worldview of dependent originations, then we begin to appreciate everything that we see, our environment where we live, such as environment that is, supported and coming into existence by the four elements, and how due to these four elements of existence of this environment benefits we as sentient beings. And if one has such understanding, one will begin to appreciate everything that is in our surrounding.
김주기 고아질래나 로아 그래서 강도 쓰던 로비에 다니게라 매 다신 세야 돼. 근데 맞잖아. 소소를 뽑아내 줘서 말어.
So if one live one's life in accordance with such understanding, the view of dependent originations, then the verse that we find in the mind training, with whomever I go, with whomever I associate with, and I will look at myself as a Lord and others, will make sense.
김주기 손함에 받은 저 빼지 점바도 때 차도를 가르치고 와서나 닝난신 슈차다지 진지 슈차다지.
So why we are not having these feelings at this point, why we are unable to follow our day-to-day worldview in accordance with different originations, is because of too much grasping at self and self-cherishing mind.
저 빼니 연애세 날에 진짜 선은 또 빼게 점으로도 하바다 가서 되네 매 되네 매체도 되네 매 담는 되네 투비가라 그러기 산나지 따로 맞아야 이나 제가 계획이면도 랑기 세네 되나 산지 담바세 때 뭐네 봐 저것도 소샤니 빼고 저저샤 전에래도 가르 막 가르이나 수수만의 지지 저지 맞아 친절라 매들 시에 제샤 계획이면도 야나 코로나 시절에 야나 메다전에 세야지 맞아야나 그 주보데 그 친절라 코로나긴 좋았지만 또 친절라 이 메텔라 다시면 돼.
So it is bringing into peace and bringing into ease within oneself is not by the other force or the force of for the external conditions, but one's own way of thinking. And one should bring about the peace and questions within oneself by one's own way of changing or the transforming one's way of thinking. That is what we needed, because if someone who is not listening to us and who is not willing to change, regardless of how much suffering and difficulties that individual may undergo, and such individual will never have the peace and experience of serenity without going through the transformation of their own mind. So similarly, if for us, if we were to have a genuine aspiration for peace and serenity of one's mind, one should always bring into bring into a change or the transformation of minds. That's why Buddha has stated and pinpointedly said that subduing one's mind or the subduing one's mind is the teachings of the Buddha.
델리 자충사시는 니마치기 소소기 수이 내당이 계시시나 소소 가르쳐고도 내파도 따고도다 소소 내파도 가르쳐고도 마다 친체라 소소 demba 이바 천한을 지게 받은 걸로 뭐 버세기도
So not only that, but even if our day-to-day activities, we should always, our actions must undertake in accordance with these dependent originations. Otherwise, we will always remain under the influence of these misconceptions.
네, 당연히 맞습니다. 오늘 호변지 하시봤다 마주봤다 셴라 떠보면 셴라 떠보면 랑신지 천이도 손바데 따바 타송기 권에 손상 랑신 된다시 유여바 인시나 데 추나지 추니 손바데라 랑신시 야바 인데 쩌마 멤버 셴라 라 레바 멤버오 데네 유데스 준데레서
So questions in that statement by the Nagarjunas set forth above, it said that the defining characteristic of a nature are not being fabricated and not depending upon something else. Was he speaking hypothetically, or does such a nature exist? Reply: the Buddha posits a nature saying, this is the reality of phenomena. It is not fabricated and does not dependent on something else. Chandrakirti's explanation of middle way coming to establish that it exists, citing sutra source.
야, 되게 된다 다니게 강로 때래. 단다 이 모블로도 이게 단지 치기제 송송 치제 송대다 뭐 가서 맞춰 봐다 되면 생인데 디지기 장신 샤바레 마도 아니 따바 타송하게 송바 말에 뭐에 치 아니 추 간지 지나요. 아니 장기 뭐한테 장신 때문에 지어 그래요 송대래서.
So now what this says is like that earlier we talked about the opponents, pointed out by saying that three attributes, causes and condition, do not bring into thing, and it is and its condition is immutable and it is posited without depending on some other phenomena, are not something that is the ultimate object of negation of it in a non-intrinsic existence.
junjele chebado zeba namba tetabe ranjin hobenji shiji sheba shi yedan shena gange onden zene jamden deji deshin sheba na shan mare re deshin sheba na jang sa deshin sheba na yongyang rong re 熊也容，马熊也容，缺那就去年的呢，那把年多，现在把送吧，去年介绍完的越多，去年介绍完的样继续，没了说吧，得大个上心喏，得大个上心样，刚些呢，得大个得大个专门买一把年当，现在多把没把看一把的，马里比让里头这。 shebe toba shayi rangi mo jeta re ji de yu tang me do she jike de ma ge de me na ji den do shang chu sen ba na la paro de shin bi lang gang ba je de gang ge shir chu ni toba shayi shir shang chu sen ba na de ta ka wa ja cha zang ba yin no she do ma she do yi she ji tang je be 住所送的，
Is there a nature that has such qualification as the Master Nagarjuna claims? Yes, it is the reality of which the Bhagavan spoke extensively, saying whether the Tathagatas whether Tathagatas appear or not, the reality of phenomena remains. What is this reality? It is the nature of things such as this eyes. And what is their nature? It is that in them which is neither fabricated nor dependent upon something else. It is their identity as known by the knowledge free from impairment of ignorance. Does it exist or not? If it did not exist, for what purpose would Buddha Bodhisattvas cultivate the path of perfections? Why would Bodhisattvas undergo the hundreds of hardships in order to know reality? Questions.
네. 맞아. 네, 뒤진 가서 여러 전에 최대의 춘이래서 최대의 ran신래서 니 된지래.
So now the suchness of the phenomena, and the nature of the phenomena are the synonymous. So we might find that suchness, nature, ultimate reality. So those are all synonyms.
단지 예서는 이게 매일 장식 가르쳐서는 차와래서 매일 춘이 가르쳐서는 차와대 매일 춘이래서 당연히 그래.
So we have conventionally saying that what is the nature of fire? The nature of fire is heat. That's all. Being heat is the nature of fire, and it is also the suchness of the fire. It's a
대제 가르쳐서는 벌써나 매대 차와인 바데 조시신라 되어먹어 봐. 변의 동반이 바데 조시신질라 되어고 말이야.
So being hot, the fire being hot doesn't really depend upon something else. Similarly, the emptiness being emptiness doesn't depend on others.
된적이의 장신지 매화이나 추 간지지나 랑게 뭐 매화이나 상주 선부터 쓰기 아니 배전전에 파주지 뭐 졸라 까 배전 때마다는 좀 매매 받지 차로.
이름 지어야겠으는 게.
추나 저 장신지 공 추에게 뭐 매봐. 그 장신 매봐이나 그 장신지 주버 개점에 시야지 추 대대대 뭐 매나 매대 차이 장신 매나 컨텐츠 손에 차로라. 아니 상주 선부터서 가와 자자도 시에바데 아니 제부 다 춘이 주버 세거래 춘이 지 이어바데 치러 배는 시완양에는 대바지 더 예배 깔려지는 용어인 전 시완양에는 대바데 코노 장신지 시완양에는 대바면은 네 유해지게요 말어 요들 지도가 가와 자라지는 사실이 제세되래 게대 상주 선만은 이제 8월 15주 강반제대 아니 대도발에서 와서 그 장바인 생에 되게 아니 수수지 쭉 간대지나 장기 뭐지 매와이나 네 상주 선부터 쓰게 네 갈래지는 매매 차거래 해서
So then, if there's no nature, if we are unable to, if you reject the existence of the nature of such things, then everything becomes useless. Therefore, that the passage that we read earlier. So why would it says, does it exist or not? If it did not exist, for what purpose would Bodhisattvas cultivate the path of perfections? Why would the Bodhisattvas undergo hundreds of hardships in order to know the reality?
야, 다또와 답해제더니 되게 shumahada 될랑서 배경 줘야 되지. 가서 다른 인사들 개념만 되는 거라서 안 되죠.
nga ra ma so rim shi kong da ta di nga gong ra ma so
핀소가 연구해서 다 가서 쉬우지 시작해요. 말에 핀소 연나 핀소 저기래. 먼저 됐어다. 거기서 되는 거 가서 배경을 주서 줘봐 전에 저도 가면 쟁아 전에 가서 너무 것도 두었지. 아니 또한테 저기 주도관에 당 아니 그만하게 이자사야 당 아니 뒤서 강 가서서 너무 다네. 아니 샤츠야 다 이자사야 당 면접해 저기 인사라다.
so since next week on Sunday that we are going for a short retreat. So Pinso will be accompanying us, and if needed any interpretations, he will be able to do this. So we will start our sessions at 10:15 morning, 10:15 a.m. And we'll begin with reciting the 6 preparatory rites, and then followed by the recitation of 100 syllable mantras.
아니 가서 저희 주룩이 배세대 지도는 때 여바지 가서는 여바지 그래체 배제대 진동을 가서 배제 그쳐서 배제 뭔가 용토비로 되니까 아니 칼라는 가서 배바 가신 요거 이제 칼라 그셔 라이로
So some Tibetans are also following on that day, and I'm pretty sure they are bringing our foods and drinks. So and then also make sure that you bring those the texts of the 6 preparatory rites texts.
대녀가 파미 디체래도 아니 가서 주제 배대 주저의 세계에서는 반대 뭐 고투투나 주반산대자 아니 존이의 세계에서잖아 아니 신라체 아니 니규자라야 미세게 메모벌레나 소소양 rel레데나 대녀가 파미 디체래래 자나자 야 대메다 야 디파루라야 지 롤렌도보다 던데 미세게 초거사를 가서 페길레데 다이체스라.
So on that particular date, given that on the day is the Parents' Day, and we'll just do our recitations and chantings as we talked about earlier, starting from 10:15 and then go all the way to the 12, and then around 12:30 we'll stop for lunch, and then after that, if you want to just relax and celebrate the Parents' Day, you should do so. Or if you want to engage in some kind of discussions, we will do some discussions as well.
비네라 미세 댄스 게임으로 와서 댄도 당 양디죠 친추추추는 소소소 그요나 아니 도대보여로 비겔 미세 게임 나잘 하발라 비겔 추스 다선 로그셀라 이거 베바지 냥도 노르지라셔요 아니 비게 갱이야 다그래.
So I would think that if you have if you want to bring some cushions or anything that's chair or whatever, the folding chairs that you have, you can just bring that, because we don't have anything ready there. It is beneficial if you can bring, helpful if you can bring cushions and all. And then also on Wednesday, I will be going there to visit and to see how it looks like.
대체 진짜 제가 이따리 니도 손을 때려도 가서 지도 소바 거름 본소리도 때려 여러 지나서 가서 진짜 제가 이 동부 장포 동부 때려 가서 양 최시해야 됩니다.
So then also I would like to mention that in August, the first week of August, will not be able to the teachings, and because we are gathering for the Guru Chok offerings, 100,000 Guru Chok offerings at the TFM in Asante.
베베 지도 소바스 이거 소바이. 네, 뭐 네, 제가 또 미세 때 좋아서 게지만 다 좋아하면 저 가만 있어. 미세 고소나 뒤에 그 손이 맞고 걸려질러야지 말이야.
Do you have any questions regarding our retreats at this time?
네, 지면은 되죠. 다게 예년 사비 개원데 대당 저와 균나 강변 저번 저전 로송 저번 대변이 모든 우저제 쇼사제 베제 조제면도 장르로 리제니데 저번 상제 신도 면대 매원 조견노도 신노 쇼보 쇼 제와 근도 양도 나무 제메 주주 변노 주진 사도 노주 연대 로조 도주 청계 고보 뉴도 쇼 예동 구로로 면대노가 노야 나야 미 데네르도 베네 소니
Kada yamba kashi sabade, Omi mare ke non jawan, Nanjen jaye ombo dajuji, Yama sembe tsera gyundo yang, Jambe yanje seve jizane, Tembe rinpa kyunzan nanje jo, Yene rubi jina nishe sho, Rangi jijin dobi nanje ne, 修道在庄严道给解，作业也就明白谁先呢？教育等报有人成就解，等报人间就给马家报，教教娘报就别说的呢，你就前辈一让就把也，面对的是我是我说。 世间教育民众真的来着上学能就人别讲，他的能就一浪别的心，教育是把人都讲究起，那上周边听见主席经，眼见世界不当面面跟，才到更多家业不把应。 南道南东这瓦莫九节，刚才铁把出了去学节，最近住了中巴地月菜，土地南就大都主席节，这些将子就有就一节，就在那边过菜上点节，那个城内数据接不到。 我上对面正面上松节，落叶明山道，连就一节，刚着热月过于新光速，天堂的话马里就业呢，现在人我的人叫作业，小白身体不。 天就一切，将别八月接大千波动，更多松波天阳地见的，得到根据结色道路是，给我的大当界肉多，有种西边叫我当界就，我刚了就多我波的。 大仙给愿早晚都跟讲，容不世界老多就。哎呀，对不起，Thank you. Good night. 人家呢？
Thank you too, Rinpoche. Thank you, Nimala. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
To Rinpoche.
Ah.